conspiracy group, the members of which display the letter Q prominently. We saw it in the crowd and signs and on shirts, and the Q stands for QAnon. The group got its start on the web. They believe they've received intel from a top government source, a mole at the highest reaches of our government, and there is no end to the false rumors they have pushed, including a smear effort headquartered on YouTube, alleging several Hollywood celebrities.
At President Trump's rally in Tampa, the image was hard to miss. The letter Q on signs and T-shirts. It represents QAnon, a fast-growing right-wing online community that pushes false conspiracy theories, including that a child sex ring is being run by Hollywood celebrities and Democratic politicians. Recent searches on YouTube turning up bogus claims about Tom Hanks and Steven Spielberg.
Steven Spielberg is a pedophile.
They use that as a cultural touch point to get people very angry at people who are anti-Trump.
So this segment right now is brought to you this morning by the letter Q, as in the letter on the T-shirts of Trump supporters in Tampa, the letter on signs like the one you're looking at saying "We are Q." So what is Q?
Supporters of a conspiracy theory now emerging from a shadowy corner of the internet into the mainstream.
People who believe in the QAnon conspiracy theory. QAnon claims that a shadowy cabal within the U.S. government is at war with President Trump, and that the president will soon purge the country of these enemies.
People who showed up last night in these QAnon and black...
Suddenly, questions about QAnon, as it's known, were being asked at the White House.
The president condemns and denounces any group that would incite violence against another individual.
It began in October. A person or group of people claiming to have top-secret government clearance began posting on message boards.
So this all started last fall on 4chan, which is an anonymous online message board. And last fall, a user calling himself QAnon began posting little nuggets of information. Q is actually a reference to the Q clearance. It's one of the highest security clearances in the U.S. government. Q claims to be highly placed in the government and has built visibility into a kind of conspiracy of globalists, a permanent criminal government that's been running the U.S. government for decades.
We're going to start today covering the blowback from President Trump's trade wars launched against multiple countries. On Tuesday, news surfaced that Ford Motor Company is preparing to announce mass layoffs after suffering major loss in profit due to Trump's tariffs. CEO Jim Hackett spoke with Bloomberg last month, estimating, quote, the metals tariffs took about $1 billion in profit from us. And the irony is we source most of that in the U.S. today anyways. If this goes on any longer, there will be more damage. Ford has yet to declare exactly how many workers will be impacted by the job cuts. However, Morgan Stanley recently estimated that a global reduction of 12% of Ford's workforce may be in store. That's equal to about 24,000 of Ford's 202,000 strong workforce. This is how just one company has been impacted by Trump's tariffs. To recap, since Trump took office in January of 2017, he slapped about 24 countries with either sanctions or tariffs. As you can see from this map, almost no continent has been left untouched by what Trump describes as his America First policy, described by some as protectionism. In May, Trump hit the European Union with a 10% tariff on aluminum and 25% steel tariff. In August, the Trump administration set its sights on Turkey, implementing a 20% tax on Turkish aluminum and a 50% tariff on Turkish steel. China has been hit with the most levies, including tariffs on $200 billion worth of the country's goods. Nearly all countries in the world are subject to a 25% tariff on steel goods imported to the United States. This week, a spokesperson for the Chinese Ministry of Foreign Affairs urged Trump to de-escalate trade tensions.
Trade and economic cooperation between China and the U.S. is in nature mutually beneficial and a win-win. No one wants to trade at a loss, still less for more than 20 years. We urge the U.S. to adopt a correct attitude, respect the fact, and stop unwarranted allegations against China. We hope it will put China and China-U.S. trade and economic ties in perspective and do something conducive to the business community and consumers in the two countries.
The U.S. and China, they've been going back and forth like this for weeks, if not months. Today, President Trump's top economic advisor said that they're making progress in setting up a meeting between President Trump and President Xi of China. Is that helping to erase any of these market worries?
Well, it's interesting. I think you may see a head fake between now and the midterms in November where, President Trump comes in, maybe cuts some kind of deal with the Chinese. Maybe they appreciate their currency a little bit. Maybe we see some easings of tensions. But I don't think this is going away. I think that we're going to be back here several times in the next few weeks and months talking about these things because this is an existential war. The things that the U.S. administration is asking China to do, fundamentally, they don't want to do. It's not a short-term fix.
And Allison, what are we expecting from the markets tomorrow? More bad news?
More uncertainty. Look, tomorrow begins third quarter earnings season. The good news is that the expectations are high that companies will report positive earnings. So many traders that I've talked to say, look, if we get those positive earnings, it may settle down the market. But there's still a lot of uncertainty and a lot what Rana was talking about, the uncertainty with those tariffs. That could wind up hitting companies really hard. And one thing that investors are going to be watching for, as companies give out their report cards for the third quarter, they're going to be trying to see if those tariffs have been cutting into profits, if those rising costs are hurting companies. And if you see that, you could see the market take another hit.
Critics charge President Trump is needlessly antagonizing European allies with tariffs on their aluminum and steel. The United States and Europe also disagree on climate change, the Iran nuclear agreement, and defense spending. European Commission President Jean-Claude Juncker says that each time he thinks of President Trump, he's lost. And he also says, quote, I do think we have to reconnect with Russia. I'm not very happy with the state of our relations. Diplomats and analysts have complained of the deterioration of the U.S.-European alliance, warning of a diminished counterweight to Russia, and even providing cover for European firms to expand their business there.
We're seeing, I think, France especially, but also Germany trying to play both sides, trying to play the United States and Russia at the same time. That realization that Russia is not a reliable economic partner, that it is a security threat to Europe much more than to the United States, has not quite sunk in, unfortunately.
Russia mostly sells Europe natural resources and energy. Work is beginning on a massive, controversial gas pipeline between Russia and Germany. Russia's Nord Stream 2 would double Russia's gas export capacity across the Baltic Sea. The United States ambassador to Germany tells Fox News the administration pushes European firms and governments to pass on business with Russia.
The strategy for the United States here in Germany and throughout Europe is really to remind European businesses just what they're dealing with when they deal with Russia.
Ambassador Grinnell points to European Union figures showing Russian trade with the EU is down since Russia invaded Ukraine and seized Crimea, from nearly $380 billion in bilateral trade in 2014 to around $233 billion in 2015. Almost $212 billion in 2016 and more than $260 billion last year.
The Russian offense and the activities speak for themselves, and many businesses throughout Europe are very uncomfortable with that.
Well, cashless has become the buzzword for the future of shopping, but what about stores without cashiers? Well, these are already a reality in China. The country's unstaffed retail sector is forecast to grow to $10 billion by 2020, which is 3 times that of 2017. And this retail concept has also become the latest battleground for the country's tech giants like Tencent and Alibaba. Valerie Tan has more from Shanghai.
If you live in China, basically, you cannot live without WeChat. It is your to-go app for everything, including opening doors. and let's see what's in store.
U.S. strong-arming may have worked for Canada and Mexico in sealing the new NAFTA deal, as it's called, but a bunch of other countries are saying, not with us. They're not going to bully us. Now, we're talking about the European Union with its $17.7 trillion GDP, putting up its fists on Friday, saying it has the economic might to withstand any arm twisting on a trade deal. This, as the U.S. ponders a poison pill. What is that? Well, that would allow the U.S. to freeze or quit trade deals with any country that enters trade relationships with a so-called non-market country. You could read China. Is that a red line countries will respect or outright ignore? In a Fox Business exclusive, let's bring in former Trade Representative Ron Kirk, who's negotiated quite a few deals himself. Ambassador, let's tackle this poison pill issue first, because it could encompass multiple trading blocs. The U.S. wants to replicate the provision within the Canada-Mexico deal that would allow the U.S. to veto the agreement if one or both decides to do deals with China. Will that effort to link everyone together to pressure China, is that going to work?
Liz, you correctly noted, you've already heard from one of our most important longtime commercial and strategic allies in Europe that they don't want any part of that. And look, the simple reality is we are in a globally competitive environment, and these are great allies and friends to have as we have used in enforcement matters against China. But we'd be fooling ourselves to think that just because we don't want to do business with China, that Europe or Canada or Mexico or the UK aren't more than happy to step into that vacuum that we unfortunately are creating. And I think it will be a much more difficult proposition to try to enforce that with a trading bloc as large and significant as the European Union.
Well, moving on to our top story this hour, however, we look to Venezuela, which announced this week it will drop the U.S. dollar in trade transactions. Venezuela's industry minister, Tarek Al-Assami, made the announcement Tuesday, saying the country will no longer submit to any monetary domination as U.S. intervention.
All transactions in the domestic exchange market will be referenced using the euro and other convertible currencies. We return to the scheme of the euro. The best help they can give the people of Venezuela is that imperialism pulls its murderous and criminal claws out of the country and let us be free. We will not be anyone's colony again.
With Venezuela and the dollar in question, we turn to former UK Member of Parliament George Galloway to discuss. George, what do you think is driving this? First of all, do you get a sense that in Europe and the UK as well, there's a sense of frustration about being tied to the US dollar?
Well, there's nothing so powerful as the power of an idea whose time has come. And the idea of breaking free of the hegemony of the US dollar is now everywhere, even in the most unlikely places. We've discussed before the foreign minister of Germany, once upon a time a client state of the United States, which is now openly searching for an alternative to dollarization in international trade. And this has spread, of course, farther and farther as the number of countries under sanctions and aggression of one kind or another at the hands of the US has literally multiplied. If you think about it, countries that are either sanctioned or threatened with sanction, why would they take the risk of continuing to rely on the US dollar, which is being used in such a politicized way? So Iran is under sanctions. Why would it trade in dollars, therefore? Why would Russia and China trade with each other or elsewhere in dollars when they are the subject of trade war and sanctions from the United States?
At this point, a lot of people are looking for economists who saw the last downturn happen before it happened. And one of those people is Harry Dent, the great economist who joins us now by phone. And Harry, I imagine you're looking at this and thinking to yourself, I knew it would happen sometime, but I'm wondering if you think this is really when it's beginning to happen.
Well, you know, we've been telling the people that follow us that you know, we're getting, I mean, we really turned bullish. When Trump got elected, we knew the gravy train was coming and tax cuts. And you can't argue with that. There's nothing better than tax cuts and repatriation. But again, it's a short-term thing. And we've said, look, this is the final blow-off rally. The question is, how long does it last? We've been warning our people that, look, there's a high chance that we're going to peak late this year, and now this is the first sign of that potentially. Or if we can keep to a 10 to 15% correction, we could have one more run up in the next year. But the odds are shifting very quickly to this could be it, because we
okay,
really
now
hit
hold on a second, Harry, because you throw out numbers here.
Higher than
I just want to make sure
the bubbles are off the charts,
okay.
and so this could be the beginning. Here's the trick, and it's very difficult when bubbles burst, and we've researched every major stock bubble in the last century. The first whack is 40% on average in 2 to 3 months.
40%.
So the problem is it's almost better to hedge. We're telling right now options are cheap. It's better to hedge your portfolio than necessarily get out. But it's better to hedge or get out early, because once this thing happens, it'll happen so quick that people won't know it.
Okay.
By any measure, Stephen Hawking's life was incredible, even more so because in the 1960s he was diagnosed with ALS, or motor neurone disease, and given just a few years to live. Hawking's most famous work, A Brief History of Time, remains one of the best-selling science books ever written, and he was deeply concerned with humanity's survival.
I see great dangers for the human race. There have been a number of times in the past when its survival has been a question of touch and go. The frequency of such occasions is likely to increase in the future. We shall need great care and judgment to negotiate them all successfully. But I'm an optimist. If we can avoid disaster for the next 2 centuries, our species should be safe as we spread into space.
Tech pioneer Paul Allen is being remembered today as the innovative co-founder of Microsoft and as a generous philanthropist. Allen died yesterday from non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. He was just 65 years old.
Allen's breakthrough idea in 1974 was to write software for another company's small computer. That led to the home computer revolution and the birth of Microsoft.
Allen was treated for non-Hodgkin's lymphoma in 2009. He announced just 2 weeks ago that it had returned. Apple CEO Tim Cook says our industry has lost a pioneer and our world has lost a force for good.
American regulators have reached a settlement with Elon Musk. They had sued the CEO of Tesla for fraud because of his tweets. Well, let's head to Cindy in the Cube.
Yeah, well, Elon Musk will have to pay $20 million, all because of his tweets. He'll also have to step down as chairman of the board and cannot be reelected for 3 years. Also, Tesla will have to pay $20 million because the Securities and Exchange Commission says they couldn't control Elon's tweets. He will, however, remain as CEO of the company. And this all dated back to this tweet from August the 7th, in which Musk said that he's considering taking Tesla private at $420 a share, and funding had been secured. Okay, so the moment he sent this out and shortly after, the price of Tesla stock just skyrocketed. People were buying up these shares before it hit $420. He sent out a bunch of other tweets as well, confirming this statement, saying that shareholders could either sell or keep those shares. Well, the Securities and Exchange Commission said that he lied. They say that funding was not secured, that these were false and misleading statements. They also say that 420 was actually a reference to marijuana because Musk wanted to impress his girlfriend. Musk ended up explaining a week later in a blog post that a Saudi Arabian fund was interested in investing, but that's different than actually saying that it was a done deal. So fair to say that it's been a pretty tumultuous week for the head of Tesla, but things could be turning around because Musk has been hinting at profitability. Tesla will be releasing its third quarter production results soon, and in an email that Musk sent to employees over the weekend, here it is on Saturday, this is part of it, he said that we are close to achieving profitability and proving the naysayers wrong.
Hillary Clinton failed the Democratic Party 2 years ago, but she's been determined to remain in the public eye ever since. Now the New York Times editorial board is fed up with it. In an opinion piece, board member Michelle Cottle complains about Clinton's masterclass in distraction. She says Clinton's recent stunts, her attacks on civility, for example, are diluting the party's message and could cause them to suffer more defeats at the ballot box. In short, Hillary, please go away for just a few minutes. Dave Rubin hosts the Rubin Report, and he joins us tonight. What do you make of that? Great to see you, by the way.
Good to see you,
One
my
of the
friend.
benefits of being in Los Angeles is you're on the set. What do you make of Hillary Clinton with, I mean, she is still the standard bearer of the party, isn't she? She was the last nominee.
Yeah, I mean, look, this line about civility, that we can no longer be civil with our political opponents, think about what that really means. I mean, just word it differently. We should start being uncivil, right? That's what she's really saying. So what does that really mean? Hunt them down in restaurants, find them in elevators, go to their jobs? Should we stop them on the road? I mean, where does this go? Hillary, they're losing control, and that's why Eric Holder, when they go low, we kick them. All of these things, these are not coincidences.
Right.
This is not, Maxine Waters, find them and hunt them down, or whatever she said, and Cory Booker did the same thing. And I've seen articles about you, find Tucker Carlson in a restaurant. He's so upset that he won't be able to go to a restaurant. And it's like, if that's where we're at, we will look back and go, man, we really screwed up the most beautiful experiment that has ever been done in world history about how do you get different people from all over the world to come together and live together. We've done it right here. And it doesn't mean it's perfect for everyone. It doesn't mean that there aren't some racists. It doesn't mean that we have class issues and economic issues and all sorts of things. But if we don't pull back this thing, it will be much worse. And it will be much worse faster than anyone can imagine.
It's totally right, because it's more fragile than we acknowledge.
Yeah.
Your kids probably have one of these, right? Not quite. Hell of a pilot? No. That skill is all AI. It's flying itself. Its processor can react 100 times faster than a human. The stochastic motion is an anti-sniper feature. Just like any mobile device these days, it has cameras and sensors, and just like your phones and social media apps, it does facial recognition. Inside here is 3 grams of shaped explosive. This is how it works.
Well, 6 people are being questioned after an apparent attempt to assassinate Venezuela's president with weaponized drones. Loud explosions interrupted a speech by President Nicolas Maduro on Saturday. 7 soldiers were injured. Officials say the alleged attack was orchestrated using drones carrying bombs. Tony DeCopel has a look at this emerging threat to national security in the U.S. and overseas. Tony, good morning.
Good morning. You put your finger on it. This is not just a Venezuela thing. This is a global thing. This is an American thing as well.
Doesn't take much training and affixing some kind of explosive to a drone to fashion a crude weapon.
Colin Clark specializes in terrorist insurgency for RAND Corporation, a nonprofit global policy think tank. He says as drones become more common, the interest in using them for terrorism increases, including in the U.S.
This is the new world we're living in, and we've got to adjust, and I think we've got to come up with countermeasures.
And speaking of countermeasures, Venezuelan officials say the 2 drones in this case were loaded with about 2 pounds of C4 explosives. They were able to knock off one of the drones electronically. The other apparently crashed into an apartment building about 2 blocks away.
Yeah.
Scary scene.
Yeah, how to deal with drones, opening up a whole new conversation. It's fascinating, Tony, to see how quickly they came out with those ballistic shields.
Yeah, who knew they even had that technology?
Yes.
I don't think you can get that at Radio
And
Shack.
we should note the country's going through an economic and humanitarian crisis.
Very serious situation.
All right, Tony DeCopel, always good to see you.
Good to see you.
A new book compiles the final essays and writings of famous theoretical physicist Stephen Hawking, and it details his warnings of a new superhuman race that could have a life-changing impact. RT's Rachel Belevins has followed the story for us. What can you tell us about Hawking's final thoughts, Rachel?
Well, as we know, Stephen Hawking made a name for himself as one of the world's most celebrated scientists. Now, in a newly released posthumous book, he gives new insight into his final thoughts on the future. In his final essays and writings, Hawking reveals he was concerned about the creation of a superhuman race changing the world as we know it. He wrote that artificial intelligence could be huge for humanity as long as restrictions are in place to control its advancements. He wrote, quote, "While primitive forms of artificial intelligence developed so far have proved very useful, I fear the consequences of creating something that can surpass humans." Hawking also warned about the power of gene editing technology, which he said could be used to create a new race of superhumans or self-designing beings who are focused on constantly improving themselves.
Panasonic is developing this wearable device designed to help you concentrate. Look at that thing. Wear Space. It's a headset with blinders to cut down on your peripheral vision and noise-canceling technology to block any human interaction. Isn't that great?
He suggested that wealthy people will soon be able to edit their own DNA and the DNA of their children in order to create new kinds of superhumans that have enhanced memory, resistance to diseases, and increased intelligence and longevity. He wrote, quote, "Once such superhumans appear, there are going to be significant political problems with the unimproved humans who won't be able to compete. Presumably, they will die out or become unimportant."
Sure. When we begin to track it, this goes all the way back to the Nazis. And again, we can look at all of the history. We can look at history and see the books. Himmler, Hitler, they wanted to, of course, conquer the world. They wanted to build a... and part of it was a secret birthing, genetic breeding program that Himmler was kind of in charge of and led the way on. Well, they believed that they could create, and we've all heard this, godmen or super, soldiers, but they call it the master race. So their version of this back then in the late 30s was to find Germans who had what they called the Aryan blood. They believed, and for us it would be the Nephilim blood. I mean, this is what they believe, whether we believe it or not. They believe they are being guided to backbreed so that they can reproduce what they called godmen. And that's history. That's what they attempted. What we didn't know was the details of that. And of course, after the war in the mid-40s, then that was kind of we thought it was off the table. Well, what occurred was when Himmler began to do this, his goal was to have 200 million super soldiers for the future, so that when they conquered the world, they have a 1,000-year reign. They would rule and reign with these soldiers. They would be stronger, faster, and again, their version, godmen, small g. So when the war was over, the rat lines took the Nazis, the SS, the scientists all over the world. And 20 years, 25 years later, all of a sudden, we have these individuals showing up at psych wards and counseling centers. At first, they're diagnosed as schizophrenic, but then they realize, no, these are not. The American Psychological Association, and worldwide, by the way, they had to decide, hey, who are these people? Because they're showing up by the hundreds in the 70s, then by the tens of thousands in the 80s. The estimates were into the millions in the 90s, and it's like, where are they coming from? They diagnosed them in the secular sense and called it multiple personality disorder. It is now called DID, dissociative identity disorder, and they also recognized that the process was a trauma-based splitting human personality and the creation of separate sub-alter personalities.
Let us talk about infinity. Imagine opening your eyes and finding yourself surrounded by water, and you cannot remember ever not being in that water. The first question you might ask is, how did I get here?
You've always been there.
What do you mean always? When did I enter the pool? You never entered the pool. You have always been in the pool. Okay, but where was I before I was in the pool?
That's a false question. There is no before in which you were not in the pool. You have always been in the pool.
Okay, but always, like, how long? Like, a billion years?
No, a billion years began a billion years ago.
Okay. But I must have been born at some point.
what was before me.
Okay, so like, what's our communication disconnect here?
There is no before you. You have always existed in the pool. Always. Forever. Infinitely. Yeah, but always.
But the secular world didn't know how to define or really go into it further, and nor did they, track it on a global scale or to see, where do they come from and why. They came up with a diagnostic, definition, and they tried to bring out treatment models, which they simply cannot heal them in a psych ward or in that process. But that's where in the 70s, 80s, I mean, across the United States, even we began to hear about satanic ritual abuse. Police stations, police detectives began to be trained in the late 80s, in the 90s. I got involved on that side of the fence in the police academy and helping to train but Josh, again, the development is nobody knew. They just saw victims. They saw people that were just damaged, and everybody's been trying to help them. But we realized that the process was satanic rituals, the demonization of these individuals, and the more we looked into it, the more we engaged, the victims. Well, we found some that came right out of U.S. military, Fort Bragg, Psy Warriors. This goes back to Goat Lab. This goes back to the Operation Paperclip. When the scientists were brought over, they brought a technology that they were already learning under Mengele and the other scientists, and I believe again, dark powers guided them in all this process. So we've heard now of MK Ultra, Monarch, goes back to the Marionite programming. We've heard all of this, and that information is all about 50, 60 years old. What we don't hear on the secular side of it is the vast development of the underground, the demonic side of this, and I believe a technology that they have come up with to in their version, their own words, to create the troops of Antichrist for the future.